The MENA Talks, a podcast series by the BIC on the Middle East and North Africa. Once a month, our hosts, along with special guests, will explore underlying historical, economic, social and political drivers behind today's systemic issues in the MENA region. The BIC is present on Facebook, YouTube and Twitter. Follow us and subscribe to receive our latest news and publications.
Welcome to the MENA Talks podcast. My name is Elisa Chery. I am a Middle East analyst at the Brussels International Center. Today, I am joined by Ambassador Marc Otte, who is also our president of the Brussels International Center. Welcome, Marc. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you for hosting me. Pleasure.
All right. So today we are going to talk about the upcoming elections in the Middle East, specifically within Iran and Syria, and also the political dynamics that are currently taking place with ongoing violence in the region. So, Marc, why don't we start with the Iranian elections? So do Iranian elections, presidential elections, matter to the international community? And is it possible to bring change to the international dynamics with Iran between actors such as the United States and the European Union when a new president enters into office?
Well, of course, election matters, and their leadership has to take into account what people express when people express their choice. Of course, the system is quite different from a presidential system, let's say, in Western Europe, where the power, the ultimate power rests with the supreme leader, Mr. Khamenei. And therefore, it is very difficult to evaluate how the balance of forces between the president and the supreme leader will play out. But it does make a difference. And if Rouhani was chosen by the people, the Iranian people, when he was elected, it means it sends a message. It sends a message to the power structure that people want to have a reformist agenda. So it is important, even if the setup is different. Now, this time, Rouhani cannot run anymore. So there are plenty of candidates that have been applying for the election, including former President Ahmadinejad. Now, the chance of any of these outliers being elected, including all the women who have applied for the ballot, it is clear that the choice will remain with the Council of the Guardians, who can run and who cannot run. At the present time, the two most likely successful candidates are the president of the judiciary, the chief judiciary, Mr. Raisi, and Mr. Ali Lahijani, who is the previous president of the parliament. So this will be certainly, if not a democratic election in the way we conceive it in the West, but it will be a test of the popular opinion and the popular feelings. The situation in Iran is not good. The economy is going down. They've been strongly affected by the COVID pandemic, and people have expressed discontent. So how will that translate into a debate, and how would that translate into the policies adopted by the power structure remains to be seen. But yes, definitely it is significant, and it could influence the way Iran deals with the rest of the region, but also the rest of the world, including the United States and Europe. As you know, there is negotiations going on in Vienna for the nuclear file. Rouhani recently expressed optimism that he thought that American sanctions could be lifted as a result of a deal taken. So it's still waiting. But on that, the noises are positive, and I don't think that whoever is elected president will change the dynamic in that respect. As you know, President Biden has made of this file one of his priorities in foreign policy, and appointed a special envoy. So I think All that is still up in the air, but the opportunity for a positive dynamic is there.
Yeah, and I firmly believe you and agree with you in all of those notions. And I think, the JCPOA kind of a defining moment for Rouhani's presidency and will also be a defining moment for whoever takes office next, as, hopefully there's a deal reached soon in Vienna, and that will take over whoever is elected into office next. So you touched on this a little bit, and I think historically, the president of Iran doesn't have much power within the government. And some may say that the position is somewhat symbolic, although I think from the international community's perspective, not understanding the dynamics of what happens within Iran, they may hold more power to the presidency and this election, therefore. However, I do believe that the majority of power within Iran lies within the supreme leader. And the current supreme leader, Khamenei, was president from 1981 to 1989. So do you think that some of the current candidates who are running for president are running in the hopes that they will be able to be in the running or have their name in the hat for the next supreme leader, as Khamenei is currently 82 years old and a new supreme leader will inevitably take place?
Absolutely. I think for the one who would be elected or those who make a good chance, like the two persons I just mentioned, they're definitely their sight on the position of the supreme leader, because it's something that's going to happen. As you know, the supreme leader, as you mentioned, is rather old, let's say, and his health is not brilliant. So there is a chance that Iran will have to go over to electing a new supreme leader in the coming years. So yeah, definitely for somebody who would be elected with a lot of success and a lot of votes and succeed in continuing to deal with the Western powers for the nuclear issue and others would make a better chance.
Absolutely. And I also think that, as you noted, I mean, the people will choose the president, which is quite promising. However, there isn't a lot of room for ideological shift, given that the president is mandated in the Constitution to be of Shia Muslim affiliation. So do you think that there is any political will or any opportunity for an ideological shift within the country when the new president comes into office?
Well, again, people will not vote because the candidate is Shia. That is a given, and it's not because you're Shia that you're an extremist. Far from there. So the expectations of the people are not about so much the ideological turns that could be taken, but about improving the economy, improving their lives, improving the health situation, and lifting this feeling of being surrounded by hostility in the region and from elsewhere. So I think yes, it is important to look at that, and there is a certain amount of openness in the Iranian media, and there is access to people, to civil society in Iran, and we'll have to judge what is the mood of the people, even if it's limited to a number of candidates carefully selected by the ideological trends, the main ideological trend of the country. But being a Shia doesn't mean you're not a Democrat.
Absolutely. And I think potentially there's a similar situation going on in Syria where ideology doesn't necessarily, it's not going to choose the next president. As you noted, the people want what's going to be best for them economically, financially, health-wise. The people want their basic rights to be taken care of. And I think that's a good transition into the Syrian elections, which are set to take place on the 26th of May. And I think that will already have taken place by the time this podcast comes out. So we will know the outcome of these elections. However, these elections were announced quite quickly, and the decision for the final three candidates that was taken gives the three candidates, very little time to campaign or announce their platforms. So do you think that the three candidates that were announced, which include Assad's former deputy cabinet minister, Abdullah Saloom Abdullah, or Mahmoud Ahmed Mari, who is the head of a small opposition party, do you think that there is political will within Syria to have a change in leadership, potentially, with a new ideological team in power? What are your thoughts on this?
Well, since the Syrian people have been raising against the dictatorship of Assad for the last 10 years, yes, there is definitely a wish for change. Whether then the two candidates that are running besides President Assad are likely to make a difference, I don't believe so. It is just a situation where there's been the Assad family has run the country for the last 40 years, and there's no change. I don't think also that although, as we said about Iran, it would not be totally the same thing as a democratic process in Western democracies. At least there is an orderly organization of elections, and people are free to go or not to go. Here, it's a country that, first of all, the president, the regime doesn't control completely. It doesn't control about 1/3 of the country. The north is occupied by Turkey, and half of the population is being displaced. So, no, there's no chance that this would be a legitimate election, and that the people who are running against Assad do have any chance of changing the situation. Besides, in Syria, contrary to Iran, the control of the government is by corruption and repression only, and so it's not legitimate in the eyes of the majority of the Syrian people. It's not legitimate in the eyes of the international community, especially those who are supporting a transition. And this election is also in opposition to the principles of Resolution 2254 that foresees election after a transition. There is a new constitution. There have been endless negotiations about the reform of the constitution pushed by the supporters of Assad regime, including Russia and Iran, by the way. It has led nowhere because the delegation of the regime doesn't enter into real negotiations. So I think the situation is quite different there. It's disorder, corruption, intimidation, and non-democratic in the sense that most Syrians will not be able to vote.
And I think the word intimidation sums it up very well. Do you think that Assad has taken action in recent months to improve economic and security measures in an effort to improve his public image, or do you genuinely think that things in Syria are taking a turn for the better?
No, I don't think they're taking a turn for the better. Yes, of course, like every politician, he will distribute presence ahead of an election, but the fundamentals of the economy is not good. Corruption remains rife, and the local communities cannot function. Also, by the fact that by limiting access for humanitarian aid cross-border, the regime has also squandered an opportunity to improve the lives of the people. COVID is not controlled, and the economic levers are in the hands of the regime and its cronies. So yes, subsidizing bread here and there or improving short-term conditions is normal in terms of making the election a bit more popular, but there is a strong attempt by the regime in Russia to encourage regions of the country to normalize relations with the regime. It doesn't seem to work very well. So that is something where the current elections will not improve the situation in Syria unless there is a change, a transition. Unless Assad being re-elected changes behavior, which could be a positive sign, but I don't think from past experience that the behavior will change a lot.
And from an international perspective, do you think that the coming months, regardless of who takes over in Syria or if Assad is reelected, that it will mean more of the same?
I think basically it will be more of the same, unless there is a new template designed by essentially the Americans and the Russians to start with, like it was the case at the beginning of the crisis, and that resulted in 2254. So I think one has to wait to see how the Biden administration will turn its attention to the Syrian situation as opposed to sticking to Iran or other things. But one thing that hasn't changed in the United States from the predecessors of Mr. Biden is that there is a trend and a wish to disengage from the Middle East. And this explains why the Biden administration has not been very proactive on the Syrian side for the moment.
Do you think that's dangerous, the United States disengaging from the Middle East, or do you think it's promising?
Well, I think it's neither dangerous nor promising. It's the decision of the United States. And I'm not sure that how far it will go, but it's a popular aspiration in the United States. So it's difficult to see how, when the United States will re-engage, and it's also obviously a matter of national interest for the US not to disappear from the Middle East. It's not a wish by the regional players, it's not a wish by Europeans, but at the same time, it should not be a wish by the United States because of the traditional position that they have, because of the fact that, look, if you look at the Syrian situation, it's and the Russian taking over control of military bases, a port in the Mediterranean, means that the Russians are pushing west, meaning the south flank of NATO. So it's not in the interest of the United States to, unless they suddenly decide that NATO is irrelevant. But I don't think it's according to their interest to withdraw, to retreat maybe a bit, and saying, for instance, to Europeans, it's your neighborhood after all. You have to do more to take care of it. And I think the message has passed already informally, and it's up to the Europeans also then to go to work and to decide whether they want or not to be strategically autonomous, as they say they want to be. And that is very important. There are expectations also from some Arab and other countries in the region to see the Europeans play a more active and proactive role. And as you've seen, what happened in Morocco the other day with migrants swimming across the strait to find refuge in Spain shows that they cannot be indifferent. Like Italy cannot be indifferent what's happening in Libya because of the current disturbances are encouraging people to move towards the north of the Mediterranean. So basically, what has to happen is a sort of new contractual arrangement between the external powers and who takes responsibilities for what, but in the name of national interest first. So I read the mind of people in America, but I don't think that's, after second thoughts, it could be, after reflection, it could be in the interest of the States of America to withdraw completely.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that the United States will always remain present in the region, as we continue to see, particularly with the ongoing violence in Gaza and Israel-Palestine. Obviously, the United States has a very large stake in that situation as well. But unfortunately, as we saw last night on the 21st of May, Egypt was the one that brokered the ceasefire, not the United States, not the United Nations, and not the European Union. Why do you think that the Egyptians were able to broker a ceasefire? And secondly, do you think that the ceasefire will hold?
Because it's a fundamental, first of all, of any mediation that you talk to all the parties. So Egypt talks to Hamas. The Western countries refuse to talk to Hamas. There's a no contact policy. So how do you want to therefore make a breakthrough if you only talk to one side of the conflict? And that is the role that Egypt has always played. Jordan has done a bit also in that respect, but certainly for Egypt, it's also not a sort of love for the Palestinians that is the primary incentive. It's because of their own security. The negotiations, the mediation of Egypt is done mainly by security and intelligence services. As I was negotiating back in 2005, the opening of the Rafah crossing in Gaza, well, I mean, how could you ignore Hamas, who was in control of the Gaza Strip? So it's clearly something where they had to agree, even if they were discreet about it. And I worked a lot with the Egyptian intelligence services at the time. So now, the other thing that I find interesting and important is that it's a regional country that does that. And it's time that we push also the regional countries to be more active in the conflicts of their region. Because any solution imposed from outside will not work for a long time. So that's another sign and another good signal coming from countries of the region, is that Egypt was able to negotiate a ceasefire. But a ceasefire, like in any war, a ceasefire is not the end of the war.
At that point, do you think that international actors will be the ones that will come in to hopefully assist in upholding the ceasefire and take further action to de-escalate the tensions between Israel and Palestine? Well,
I think, first of all, there was definitely a lot of pressure on Israel on the side of by President Biden to agree to a ceasefire. As you've seen, the Israelis continued until they thought they had finished the job. So this requires now that not suddenly you call for an international conference to finalize the solution of the conflict. That won't work. But that there is a sort of roadmap to go there, starting with stabilization, healing the wounds of the people, whether physical or mental, reinstating humanitarian aid to the Gazans and the Palestinians in general, and making sure that there is among Palestinians, the various factions in Palestine, an understanding about how they will present their position in a unified manner. That's another point. And then, yes, listen to what you've seen is growing in importance, the young generation. The young generation in Palestine is no longer interested in the two-state solution because they don't believe in it anymore. So what is it? What will be the point of consolidating the peace if the elements of a roadmap are not there to get to a point where, as I said, not start negotiations immediately? It's not possible. But what are the confidence-building measures that could be put in place between Israel and the Palestinians, with the help of the international community, to eliminate cause of tensions that have caused the problem? But it's clear that one of the takeaway of this last round of hostilities is that a lot of people had thought that the Israeli-Palestinian issue was gone. It was no longer important, that the normalization between Arab states and Israel would make it secondary, and so on. My takeaway is that the fire has been burning under the ashes, and a sudden blow of big wind has fired up the conflict again. And it will continue. It will continue to be like that until there are fundamental answer to the demands of the Palestinians to live a dignified life, to be free, not to be occupied, and to go on with their lives the way they choose to go on with their lives, and not being imposed by outsiders.
Do you think there's hope on the horizon, or only time will tell how the conflict will de-escalate or escalate?
Well, the hope of the horizon is that what I just said about the fire under the ashes is that a number of external parties have realized that you cannot get away with ignoring and hoping the status quo will continue to be valid, because it's not a status quo anyway. I mean, while there is no fight, there is a continuing occupation, there is a continuing settlement activity, as we've seen. One of the elements of the current conflict were Jerusalem, the expulsion of Arab from the neighborhood of Sheikh Jarrah, for instance. So this is not going to work. Now, the other thing is leadership on both sides of the conflict. Is there a Palestinian leadership and an Israeli leadership that is ready to shed the immediate concerns or the immediate preoccupations of security, of occupation, and so on, to put things on the table that will lead to something that will be the end of all the things that Palestinians are protesting about and what the Israelis are worried about, but in a manner that is not putting a map or a plan on the table right away. It's just to work, to change the mentality, to change the modus operandi. I have a problem, I talk to you about it. I don't shoot rockets or tanks.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think, all over the Middle East, as we're talking about elections and change within leadership, there has to be a will amongst the leadership to interact, whether it's in Israel, Palestine, or Syria, or Iran. Leadership has to take action, and they have to be responsible for the actions that they take. Do you have any final words? And then we will wrap up for the day.
The conclusion is leadership is needed on all sides, and that it's important that we don't impose a solution to the people of the region, but that the people of the region own their solution. A bit like now Iran and Saudi Arabia are talking, which is good news about the tensions in the region. The role of the international community is to encourage it and to provide the assistance needed, whether technical, political, or other, to make that happen.
Absolutely. Marc, thank you so much for your time today. Once again,
Sure.
This is the MENA Talks podcast. My name is Elisa Chery. I was joined by Ambassador Marc Otte for our discussion on Middle East elections and the ongoing violence in Israel-Palestine.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the MENA Talks. Share your thoughts with us on social media with the hashtag MENA Talks, and follow us to receive our latest news and updates. The MENA Talks is a podcast series on the Middle East and North Africa, an initiative of the Brussels International Centre.